One-X Developer Podcast.
Rolling. Let's go. Welcome back to One-X Developer Podcast.
I'm Brendan.
I'm Collin. Brendan, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about developer tools and specifically developer tools that we would not recommend to friends and family. So this conversation kind of started with the idea of what makes a tool developer friendly? Why are certain tools kind of like geared towards developers? What are those features that make them helpful? But then we were also kind of talking about what are some tools that we use on a daily basis that we really wouldn't recommend to friends and family because there's kind of a barrier to entry there that we'd have to explain to other people why it's beneficial, and it's really hard to make people understand. So maybe an example is best. So I use Obsidian. We both use Obsidian, and I use it for all kinds of note taking and stuff. And two of the things I really love about Obsidian are that everything is stored in plain text, and that I can sync it between all my machines with Git. Most of the people that I talk to about productivity tools that are interested in that stuff don't care about either of those things.
Yeah.
They have no issue with things being stored in proprietary formats, and they would just prefer to use like some company provided syncing service to make things as easy as possible. For me, it's really hard for me to understand why other people are not as excited about those features as I am. I'm like, yeah, it's all plain text. Like there's no danger of Obsidian going under someday, and I lose all my stuff like there is with Notion or something like that. That's really exciting to me, and I was really excited to have found Obsidian. And then just the fact that I think part of the thing with Git is like that's a tool that I use all day every day. I love that I can use that to sync my Obsidian notebook, my Obsidian Vault between machines. There's no learning curve for me because I already know Git. But if you have to explain to someone how to use Git, what version control is, it's a much harder sell.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I should say, like, I use Obsidian, but I think I'm like the most basic Obsidian user there is. Like, I don't sync between devices. I don't do any of the crazy stuff that I hear people do with Obsidian. I've barely tapped any of the potential. The main thing for me is it supports Markdown. Yep. And that's it for me, really. It's like, hey, this is a simple, not annoying to use notepad, and it supports Markdown and generally does what I expect it to do when I push buttons. That's all it is for me.
What kind of stuff are you storing in there? Are you taking daily notes or anything like that?
Mostly just random thoughts. It basically replaced my physical notepad at work. And I'm using it here right now for our podcast notes.
Okay.
But also, like, I don't sync device. Like, this is just local on my phone, and I don't have this on my laptop. But that's fine for me.
Why is that fine for you? Why don't you want to look at those notes later on your laptop?
Because I always have my phone with me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I mean, how does that work? Actually, I haven't looked into it. Like, how do I? So you have a Git repo, and can I Git push from my phone? Is that possible?
It is.
Really?
So I don't use it on my phone at all. I just use it on multiple machines, desktop computers, I guess. But yeah, I've definitely read about people syncing from their phones. There's some kind of Obsidian plugin that I think makes it easy, but there are definitely Git compatible stuff on phone on iOS.
I know there's also. I probably should have researched this more before we started recording. But Obsidian has like, they have some paid service, right?
They do.
Like, what does that do?
That takes So you're storing it at that point. You're storing it in their cloud, and they take care of all the
Okay.
all the nitty gritty of syncing between devices. So yeah, if you don't want to think about Git and you don't care about that, you can pay a monthly fee and they'll take care of it for you.
So that to me sounds like that should be an easy sell to non-tech people. Like, hey, you pay this small fee, you got all your notes everywhere. I guess the only thing is there's free tools that do that.
Yeah.
I guess that's the question.
I'm sure, I've never used it, but I'm sure the Obsidian Sync service is a much smoother experience than the one that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of part of why I think this topic is interesting, because sometimes I look at my process around this stuff and it's like, what am I doing to myself?
Yeah.
Why don't I just pay the $7 a month or whatever to get the syncing service? But I don't know. If you can save $7 a month doing it yourself, if you know how to do it, why not do it yourself?
Mm.
I think, to me, that's kind of exciting and fun. But I do understand it's really hard to sell other people on.
But that's also a trap that people fall down. I've seen people online say like, "Oh, I spend more time tweaking my editor. I spend more time screwing with Notion than I do completing the tasks on my to-do list."
100%. I remember reading Getting Things Done back in the day, and this is many decades old at this point. But his limit was 2 minutes. If something takes more than 2 minutes, you put it on your to-do list. It becomes like an item on your to-do list. If it takes less than 2 minutes, you do it now, because there's always that danger of like you build up the framework around your productivity tools that ends up taking more time than doing the tasks themselves.
That just reminded me. I have an update from last episode actually. This is a big deal. I got the anime girls in VS Code. So I have Hatsune Miku looking at me while I'm coding in the background. Everything is right in the world. So it had to do with like, so I had installed VS Code with Flatpak, and so it was just a permissions thing. But the reason why the chmod command or whatever didn't work is because I guess when you install a Flatpak, the directories are different. So it was like the wrong path or whatever. So I ended up just uninstalling it, and it just reinstalled with like through a zipper or whatever. And anyway,
is it more fun?
I don't know. I mean, I'm happy that Hatsune Miku is there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if it didn't take too much work and it makes it even a little bit more fun, say go for it.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, it would be hard to sell people on why. It would be hard to sell anyone on why that's important.
Yeah. Well, I think to even sell someone, the non-tech kind of people that we're talking about, to sell someone on that, you would first have to explain, like, why. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people just see code editors as Notepad, and it's like, why do you want to spend time like customizing Notepad? I think it's hard to explain how much time software developers spend in, their code editor.
Yeah.
And why you would spend any time making it fun. What our whole last episode was about.
Yeah, I can't explain it. But yeah, I mean, there are other things. Another thing we brought up before we started recording was like Linux, right? I think all Linux fanboys can relate to this, right?
Yeah. Trying
to explain why, hey, this is actually super sick, and it's free, and you should use it, even though sometimes it's just going to break, and you're not going to know why.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah, I went through a period many years ago of, trying all kinds of different Linux distributions, comparing, contrasting, and I had so much fun doing it. And, I would try to talk to people about it and explain why Linux was interesting or important. And, sometimes people would be interested and they'd be like, oh, should I try it? And I had to say, like, no, probably not.
Yeah. It's
not unless you're willing to, format your hard drive and install an operating system and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, maybe these days it's easier to run operating systems side by side, but at least at that point it was kind of a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it's definitely easier, but still, I don't know if it's, noob friendly. Have you ever seen that copy pasta about GIMP, about the guy using GIMP at school?
Uh-uh.
Can I just read it?
Sure.
Because it kind of sums up the whole thing. Using Linux in front of my classmates, teacher says, okay, students, now open Photoshop. Start furiously away at terminal to install wine. Errors out the ass. Everyone else has already started their classwork. I start to sweat. Install GIMP. What the fuck is that? A girl next to me asks. I tell her it's GIMP and can do everything that Photoshop does, and it's free. Okay, class, now use the shape tool to draw a circle, the teacher says. I fucking break down and cry and run out of the class. I get beat up in the parking lot after school. It's a classic.
That's great.
That kind of sums up what we're talking about here, right? Well, no, not really though, because there are tools that are actually easy to use, and not like crazy, weird looking stuff that, for some reason, like only nerds know about, like Obsidian.
Yeah. Let's go back to GIMP for a second, because I think that's a really interesting one. Because years ago, my wife, who's proficient in Photoshop, she did try GIMP, and she hated it.
Really?
She despised it, but she struggles to explain really like why.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what do you hate about it? Because for me, as a very casual Photoshop user, I'm usually just like cropping images, doing a little color correction. GIMP is great. It works perfectly fine for what I need. But she hates it. And I think it's because of that shape tool kind of stuff. It's like Photoshop just has this thing that makes it easy. Like why doesn't GIMP have the things that I need to do the job?
Yeah, I don't even get the shape tool thing because I've never done any really photo editing stuff. But
I assume it's just a missing tool. Yeah, I don't know.
It's just easier or better on Photoshop.
Yeah. But I think that's an interesting one because I don't think there's anything... GIMP is not especially technical. If you know how to do Photoshop and you're familiar with the metaphors of layers and things like that, I don't think there's anything preventing you from using GIMP, but at least, from one user's point of view, it was an inferior product. And, compared to its proprietary counterpart, it was an inferior piece of software. But I never could get her to explain why she thought that.
Yeah, and that's interesting, but I think that has value. Like, I think that's a real thing, so we're both iPhone users, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've used Android before, and not to knock any Android. It's probably way better now than when I used it. But I remember, like, the first time using iOS, like, oh, this feels good.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it's this very ethereal, like, that sounds like such a, like, I don't even like saying it because I feel like I sound like such a, like, brainwashed Apple nerd. You know what I mean? Saying that, like, oh, it just feels good. It's just easy. It's snappy. I don't even know how to explain it, but there is, like, I don't know if it's just the UI or if it does actually perform better, but there's something about it that feels really, really good. And I think that is, like, a real valuable thing to people.
Yes. And it's a really hard thing to put your finger on. And it's a really hard thing to develop for because it's so hard to define, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had kind of a similar experience moving to iOS eventually. I kind of went back and forth for my first years of using a smartphone. And at least at that point, yeah, Android felt a lot rougher in general. But I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying about, like, what makes dev tools attractive to devs is, like, it's a little bit hard to. There are some specific features, but in general, I just think there are certain tools that appeal to the developer mindset in a way that is a little bit hard to define, a little bit hard to put your finger on.
Yeah.
I think Obsidian is one of those for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, and sometimes I almost wonder if like, do developers like want something that's kind of worse, like something that they can tinker with and mess with, and they do something cool with it, and it makes them feel like really smart because they did it. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, as a 1X developer, you know, who doesn't use Emacs or Vim and just uses a mouse, like that sometimes seems that way to me. You know, like, well, maybe you're faster after you learn it, but like I don't know, this kind of works for me, and like I want something that's similar to other things I've used before, and I want something that I can just dive into and use and not really think about.
Yeah. Maybe it's not so much about dev versus non-dev or tech versus non-tech people. I mean, maybe there are really just levels of like how willing we are to try something that's different from the things that we know, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes it's just about how much are you willing to be on the cutting edge of things? Not even the cutting edge, but how much tolerance do you have for installing an operating system that might only kind of half work some of the time?
Yeah. Or something that you have to tweak and screw with. You know, another one we were talking about is Plex servers.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I am just like a normal guy, I think, when it comes to media most of the time. I stream stuff on Netflix and Hulu, whatever else I have, you know, and I don't do a lot of crazy stuff with it. I don't care much about like the quality of video as long as it's like not grainy or anything. And I know people who are like really into just having like top of the line visual quality and audio quality on everything, and they have these Plex servers that are like, man, they're talking about stuff I don't even know what it is, literally. And like they've got all this media set up, and I don't know, for me, like with media, like watching something, I just want to like hit play and that's it. You know, I don't really get satisfaction from like organizing it all and like doing all this, you know.
Yeah, right. I think a lot of people do kind of get off on that. Like that's a fun thing to do for them, is to organize their media library. There's the kind of collector mentality of collecting all the stuff, but then there's, you know, maybe the same kind of thing that makes like stamp collecting fun or whatever. You organize them and like everything's in its right place, you know?
Yeah.
And productivity tools are like that too. There's a lot of people who are into, you know, collecting productivity tools more than doing the work.
And I found that like recently I have less tolerance for really anything that's supposed to be fun that like takes a lot of work and thinking. I'm less interested these days in like a video game that requires me to like learn a lot of shit. I'm more interested like just at the point of life that I'm at in life of like games that are like more casual, you know, more you jump in, you play, and then like you have fun and that's it. And you know, so for example, like the exact counter example of that is I got into Dwarf Fortress a while ago. Have you ever heard of Dwarf Fortress?
I've heard the name. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, so it's a game that is kind of hard to explain. I think the closest like video game I could just compare it to for people who like aren't into gaming is like The Sims, sort of. But like just imagine like if The Sims was just way more complicated and the scale was way bigger. Like so you can have hundreds of dwarves in your fortress, and they all do their own thing. You can't directly control each dwarf, so you can like create tasks for your dwarves, and they just get around to it when they get to it. And they each have like their own personality and their own moods that's all like randomly generated. So it's a dense game. There's like a lot of shit going on, and there's like part of playing the game, part of the fun of the game, I think, is having the wiki up on another window and trying to figure out, okay, how do I put a furnace here to make it work? because it's all very like not user friendly. The whole game is made by like 2 guys, and that's something that, you know, if someone said like, "Hey, should I play Dwarf Fortress?" I would. I mean, I like the game a lot, but I don't know if like I would. You know, it depends so much on you and what you want out of a game and what you're interested in. And I mean, the only reason I still play it now is because I already learned a lot of that shit.
Right.
I wouldn't want to like be learning a whole thing like that right now.
I mean, I think that's it with a lot of stuff. Yeah, how much tolerance do you have for like a learning curve? How much tolerance do you have for when you started up not being able to do anything? And you have to learn a whole world before you are able to do anything.
Yeah, and like the controls are all weird. There's all these like key bindings that you have to kind of just know, and yeah, it's nuts.
What's an example of a good game that's just you just start it up and play? I'm thinking like Tetris.
I mean, Tetris is a really good one. Actually, you know, it's kind of funny you bring it up because I remember being a little kid, and we had like an original Game Boy with Tetris. And I remember I was like really young. I thought the goal of the game was to build the coolest tower you could build.
Yeah.
And so I get to the end. I'm like, why was my score so bad when my tower was so sick? And last time I had this really high score, but my buildings were falling down. But anyway,
that's hilarious.
Yeah, there's a lot of games that are like easy, and I guess it depends on what you've been exposed to. But I mean, I think of like Call of Duty as a game that you kind of jump into and just play. A lot of those like first-person shooter type games are like that. I think Nintendo is really good at making games that are like easy to jump into but still hold your attention. Mm-hmm. Like Mario Odyssey is a really great game. You know, you jump on people's heads, but there's still like a lot of different things you're seeing throughout the game. Yeah,
I think, you know, so much of it is a little bit hard to, when we're talking about who we would and wouldn't recommend these things to, so much of it is, what you've been exposed to before. Like, on the computer side, there are probably plenty of people who've never used Linux, but have used Mac OS in a more advanced way, and you could tell them, if they installed Linux tomorrow, you could tell them, hey, drop to the terminal and run this command. And they would know what that meant. Whereas, like, if I were to tell a lot of people that, they would have no idea what that meant. A lot of Mac OS users have probably never dropped to the terminal and run a command. Or if they did, it was because one time their printer wasn't working and they had to look it up online or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so much of it is, what have you learned before? What is similar to this thing? If you've never been exposed to something that's similar, there's going to be a learning curve. Yeah.
So, I mean, what's kind of like, what are we getting at here? Like, do people need to be more willing to learn new things, or should tools be easier to use?
Yeah, I don't know if there's really any should about it. It's really just about where we're sitting on the timeline. Not the timeline, but where we're sitting on our interest in trying new things and our interest in learning new things. I will say, I think yes, people should be wanting to try new things and trying to learn new things. I think that's a good quality to have as a person, you know? And maybe to get a little philosophical about it, I think that is hard to maintain as you get older. I think it's really easy to slip into a mode of not really wanting to learn new things, just kind of sticking with the things that you know, and you kind of, you stop being exposed to new things. You think it's too hard, the learning curve is too steep, whatever. So yes, I think people should be more willing to go out on a limb and learn new things that are different from things that they've been exposed to.
Yeah. I think another good tool that I wouldn't recommend necessarily to a lot of people, but is really useful if you're willing to learn it, is Git. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but like the way I explain Git to people who have never used source control is I always like kind of give the example of when you have, you have SA and then you have SA2 and then you have SA final 2 and then SA, and you have all these different versions. You have these, they're different branches. You don't think of it that way, but they are different branches of history for each file that you've saved. And sometimes I think back on even just like, writing an essay, and I think like, if I understood Git, if I was using Git, that would have been a lot easier, even just with writing an essay or doing something that's not code related. And I know there are people who do that, who use Git for, tools that are not software, or, files that are not software related at all.
Yeah.
Or, files that aren't software, files that aren't software development related. And, man, it would be cool if, like, I don't know, Git's interesting to me because a lot of the time I'm using Git and I'm like, damn, it feels like this should be easier. It feels like some of these things should be simpler. And I know there's been a lot of like people who've tried to make things that are supposed to be easier, but it seems like they never take off for some reason.
Yeah.
But man, if someone could just crack the code on like version control across the board in like it doesn't have to be a GUI, but something that's friendly to people who don't want to use a terminal. I think that's like that's gonna like elevate humans to, that's gonna be like a utopian society right there.
Totally. Yeah, no, I agree 100% with that. I mean, almost the way that, Google Drive has like version control. You can hop back to any version of a Google Doc.
Yeah.
I mean, that's version control without having to understand what it means to stage something and commit it and all that. It just records a version history. Here's a really interesting thing about Git that would keep me from recommending it to people, right? So you explain the concept of file versions like you were just talking about, and they say, oh, cool, so could I use that for like storing different versions of images? And you have to be like, well, no.
Right.
Binary files are different than text file. And they go, what do you mean? Like, I don't think of files that way. Like,
Well, if you're writing really good commit messages, it would work, right?
I thought there were limitations on binary files.
Oh, you're talking about that, yeah.
Like, if you're trying to store huge images or huge, I don't know, like Blender assets or something, huge movie files or something.
Right. Yeah, I thought you just meant like how, some files, like when you diff it, it's just like a bunch of garbage that's not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which you could get around by just writing good commit messages. But yeah, there's some scaling problems with Git, and there's some funky stuff there. And
all the things that we're talking about, like being able to diff one version of a file against another, just doesn't it doesn't work as smoothly with like images and binary files. I use Sublime Merge, and that has some, that can do some side-by-side comparison of images and stuff. So I don't know, maybe there's been more progress on that than I thought, but I just think that's kind of an interesting thing that you and I kind of know what that means and understand why there might be limitations around those files. Whereas if I were to recommend Git to a non-tech person, they just, I don't think they think about files in that way, that a text file is different than an image file in some fundamental way, I
also wonder, like, this kind of makes me think, how much of this, do you think the opposite kind of happens? Like, I've worked with people who use old tools, or like, like I know people who only ever use Postgres from the terminal, and they like won't use a dbeaver or any of those tools to like visualize their data. It almost makes me feel like there's an opposite kind of thing going on, where they're scared of this new thing that I think most people would consider as actually easier.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's going on because, like, I came across this tool called Jujutsu a while ago, which is built on top of Git, and it's one of those that the idea is it's a little bit more friendly than Git. I haven't used it much, but I think the idea of one of the big things with Jujutsu is that, like, there's no staging, really. I think it kind of just commits automatically, which, from what I understand, is kind of how Mercurial worked. I don't know much about it because I haven't messed with it, but I almost wonder if that's what's going on with me. Is like I'm afraid to try this new thing because, well, and it's really not so much that it's going to be hard for me as much as it's just like I always know Git's going to be there, right? I know my next job is going to be using Git. I know everyone's using Git.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know what these jujitsu commands are always going to do all the time. I don't know. I feel like that's a thing too, though. Like there are people who are stuck in their old archaic ways and don't want to, like they just won't touch something that could be easier.
100%. I think that's absolutely a thing. Yeah, people don't want to learn something new, even if it's obviously easier. I think a lot of that comes from a fear of losing flexibility with tools like Git. You know, There's always this fear whenever you put the GUI on top of it and try to simplify things. I think that you have to, you kind of have to sacrifice some flexibility. And I think that, you know, the old heads who understand the Git internals and like they really understand how it works are worried about losing some of that flexibility. Like, I don't know, just trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but they won't be able to go into the Git directory and like recover a lost file that they accidentally deleted or, you know, something like that. I think a lot of it has to do with, but I think maybe the mechanism is the same. It's like this thing that I know, I don't want to learn a new thing on top of it, especially if the old thing is working.
Yeah, I think Git is like a particularly interesting one because like this isn't to say that like GUIs are better. Like I use Git from the terminal because that's what I've done, and it feels easy to me, and I stay away from a lot of the GUI tools because I feel like I don't know exactly what they do. Mm-hmm. Like I've worked with people who use those, and they're like, "Oh, should I click this, you know, this button that says like sync?" There's like a sync button. It's like I don't know what that does. I don't know if that is that pulling, is that fetching everything. I don't know what that's doing. So can you just open the terminal real quick and like just type this in because I know what that does.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm backwards thinking. I don't know.
I think even the terminal itself is kind of an example of that, right? It's hard to it's sometimes hard to explain to people for the last 20 years why there's advantages to using the terminal. It's like, no, there's enormous flexibility. It can often be a lot faster than, for certain kinds of like repetitive actions where you're having to click here and click there and click there. You can script that all with a script. But again, there's a learning curve, and I think it's really hard to convince people, no, there's still advantages to using the terminal.
Well, I almost feel like a hypocrite, honestly, because there's that, but then at the same time, I just like won't use Vim. I won't, because I use all the arguments that I think other people would use, right? The learning curve is so high, it takes so long to learn that. It's, this is similar to what I know, so there's less kind of conceptual context switching, right? Like VS Code works more or less the way my browser does, which works more or less the way like my email client does.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Why do I draw that limit there?
Let me ask you this. These days, do you tend to experiment with software? For myself, I find myself experimenting with a lot less software as I get older.
Do you mean like trying new tools and stuff?
Yeah.
Definitely less. Yeah. I'm still interested in stuff. I'll try new stuff, but yeah, definitely less than I used to.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that has something to do with this? Do you think it's like, I don't know. Are you happy with the tools that you have and they're just kind of working and you don't really need to look around?
I guess that's part of it. Is if something's good enough, it's good enough. But also I remember I went on this kick for a while where I was like trying all these different terminal emulators. I had Terminator, and I had Quake, and this, and
Yeah, you made me install Quake.
yeah, and they all do the same shit. You know what I mean? Like the only difference is like opening a new tab is a different key binding or something. You know, they're really all kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
By the way, now I use Kitty. I just installed. Recently actually I started using Kitty because I don't remember why. I was having an issue with something, but Kitty's available on everything and it's really fast and I like it.
Okay. I'll check it out. Can I use it on Mac?
Yeah. It's available on Mac and I think all Unix stuff.
I definitely find that I've gone on kicks like that, like you're describing, where I try all kinds of different stuff. And I kind of reach that saturation point sometimes where it's like, these are mostly kind of doing the same thing. Like, and you just kind of settle on the one that has the one or two features that you can't live without, you know? But I find a lot less desire to experiment with new stuff these days just because I really like my setup. And something is going to have to come along to really sell me on trying a new tool these days. You know what I mean? You got to really show me something new and something different in order for me to spend the time to learn a new tool.
Well, and I think part of it is like hype exhaustion. You know, like how many times has somebody been like, "Oh, dude, you gotta use this is the most amazing thing," and then you use it and you're like, "Well, this doesn't really add much," or sometimes you don't even like it. And honestly, I almost feel if a tool comes out that's like, "Oh, this changes the whole game," I'm almost like, "Okay, whatever." Like, you know what I mean? Like, because if everyone's telling me that for a while, sure, I'll check it out. But you know, there are tools that do all the things that we do, you know.
You hear that way too often for it to be really true, right? Oh, game changer.
Yeah.
This is the one that's going to revolutionize everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about Ledger. That was another one you mentioned.
Yeah, Ledger is a command line accounting program. So I've started using it for just my personal finances. And this is kind of one like I was just talking about, where I was looking around for a tool. I'd tried different, like, I don't know, kind of budgeting tools and things like that. And I don't know, they were all kind of fine. They all kind of did the same thing. And then I came across Ledger. And this is one that I absolutely would not recommend to my non-tech friends. Like, all of the magic happens in my Sublime and on the command line.
Real quick, what do I type in to find this in my search engine?
Ledger CLI.
Okay.
That's usually I think that's what it goes by usually. And so all it is you have a plain text file, and there's a format that's just kind of it's extremely simple file, and everything is double-sided accounting. So you're always taking from one account and adding to another. I don't know if you've ever messed around in accounting departments and stuff, but that's a pretty common practice of making sure things are always in balance on both sides. And it's a little bit overkill for personal finances, but if you have multiple accounts and things are getting complicated, I do find it really helpful to think about things in that way, in the double-sided accounting way. And from there, you just have this plain text file. Like, I've written Python scripts that can parse my file and spit out reports and things like that. I do everything I need to do from the command line. I don't have to, that's one area where I think that doing things from the command line is much, much faster than most of the stuff that I would be doing from a GUI. Yeah, I really feel like it changed the game for me.
What exactly type of stuff are you doing? Are you just keeping track of income versus expenses on your accounts?
Basically, but then you're also categorizing your expenses. So you can put your expenses into various accounts, and then you can run reports like, how much did I spend on groceries this month? How much did I spend on groceries this year? It has tools for just like querying all that stuff.
Because I think like I get like on like my Chase card I can see what I spent stuff on, but I can't do that. I can't do like all of this type of thing. What does it sum up to, or that kind of thing. And
I find it really helpful. Yeah, that I'm able to categorize things however I want, and even categorize them in multiple ways. I also do some kind of I don't know what you call it, but like buckets or whatever that I'm putting aside money to go on vacation or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a whole process there of transferring money from my checking account to this fund that's set aside, or that kind of thing.
So you're not a spreadsheet guy? I feel like this is a very, I feel like I could do this in Google Sheets.
Yeah, you probably could. No, I did a spreadsheet for a long time, and I like this a lot better.
That would be slow. I see how, you're mostly just entering numbers. So I think that's very, terminal-esque, terminal-friendly kind of thing to do. Yeah.
And I think that you can, I think that this is, you have a lot more flexibility with how you can report on the stuff, right? I can generate a CSV file of whatever I want from this file. How many times did I go to get gas this month or whatever?
This just kind of scares me because I feel like I'm going to see how many times I go to Quick Trip and buy a hot dog, and it's going to be disgusting.
Yeah. No, I have an expenses booze account that is just, it's not good. Anyway, that's one that I really like, that I would not recommend to friends at all. I don't think, exactly like you're saying. I think most people would say, why can't you just use Excel for that? Like, it has graphs and charts and you can categorize things. Like, why are you making your life so hard? But I find the simplicity of it really appealing. I also find the fact that it's not anywhere in the cloud and is just a plain text file, and I can sync it up however I want. I love all that stuff about it.
Yeah.
Features that someone else might not care about.
That was all I had written down, except for torrenting and torrent files.
Oh yeah, that's a good one too.
Which so I kind of give the example of so I don't really torrent stuff anymore, right? Like I was saying, I stream, and I've never downloaded anything illegally. But torrenting I feel like is something that's just a little bit hard to do, or a little bit daunting, I guess, if you're not tech savvy. The concept of seeding and leeching, that was weird for me when I first downloaded the torrent. And it's just something that I don't recommend to people, mostly because it's really easy to fuck up. Really easy to end up, downloading the wrong stuff, downloading dangerous stuff.
You're talking about getting malware and stuff like that?
Yeah. I also I remember I downloaded something and once, and it was in Italian, and there was no English setting, and I was damn, I downloaded that all night. And, but you kind of need to know what you're doing a little bit to be. That just goes for downloading stuff in general, which kind of opens this whole can of worms, sort of man, should anybody be using a computer? You know what I mean? Though it's we're all downloading stuff and installing stuff and doing stuff that we don't know. You know what I mean?
Gotta trust somebody sometime.
Yeah.
Or else the internet's gonna fall apart.
Yeah.
I think the difficult part with torrenting is just explaining, conceptually, where is this stuff coming from? Who is hosting this? And it's all over the place.
Yeah. and also explaining it to people, sometimes it's hard to okay, if they do want to download things that they should not be, it can be kind of hard to explain that okay, look, it's it is illegal, but like probably fine. That's a weird concept in general, honestly.
Yeah.
Which I would never recommend anyone, download any copyrighted material that they don't own.
Right.
But
we have concepts like that, though, like speeding, right?
Just everyone does it.
It's illegal to speed, but you can, for most, you'll be okay
if no one's around. Or like or even weird thing like like marijuana, where it's like it's legal in your state, but it's still illegal federally. And it's like I don't really know what's going on here, but anyway, if you want to do it, you'll probably be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That situation, I feel like, was even a lot weirder, 20 years ago, when it was, I don't know, sort of kind of legal in California, but then like other states were really, really harsh on it. Yeah. We were also talking about Framework laptop.
Oh yeah.
And so you have a Framework laptop, but you wouldn't necessarily recommend that to a non-tech savvy friend.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's kind of right on the line. Have we talked about Framework on the podcast?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so Framework laptops, I'm really excited about it. This isn't a sponsor or anything. I just think they make really cool computers. I got a Framework 16 recently, and so the idea is that it's like a modular laptop. So when your laptop is old and slow, you can just replace the graphics card or upgrade it in some way. Or if some component breaks, you can just replace it rather than throwing away the whole laptop like you would with a MacBook maybe. And the setup is as easy as it probably could be. I mean, there's YouTube videos, there's instructions that are like pretty clear, but it involves a little bit of like, you get it and you have to like put the keyboard on, and you have to like put the RAM in there and insert it. You got to put the hard drive in there, plug it in and stick that in there. And you got to do, there's some screwing things in and that sort of thing. And I think it's pretty easy, but I feel like it's something that a lot of people would not be comfortable with, that they would be very scared to do.
Yeah.
So I do recommend Framework. I recommend it to most people. But just know that going in, like, yeah, you gotta like, you're gonna have to follow a tutorial that I think is pretty easy to follow, but it's not just buying a Chromebook and starting it up and it works.
I think one of the interesting things with Framework is that there is a very obvious concern that maybe non-tech people would care about, which is the environmental concern, right? I think that's a pretty easy case to make with the Framework laptop. It's like, how every 5 years you throw your laptop in the trash, or, you try to recycle it or try to donate it to a school or whatever. It's like, imagine if you were generating a lot less waste. Like, that seems like something that, even if you didn't really care about the technical side of the laptop, and even if you thought it might be kind of a pain in the ass to put it together or whatever, I could see people getting on board with that just for the environmental concern alone.
Yeah. And I should also mention, I bought the DIY version. I don't know what the like pre-setup version is like, what that experience is like. But my understanding is that there's another version where you buy it, and I think it is more, like, I would imagine you still have to put some of the modules in yourself because they're different. But it at least comes with like Windows already installed on it and everything, so you don't have to do any of that.
I thought they were always Linux. You can do Windows?
Yeah, you can buy one. You can buy one with Linux or with Windows.
Huh.
So yeah, that's an option too.
Cool.
And it was interesting. I was watching a video just yesterday by MKBHD where he was at the lab where they test iPhones. Like, they do the drop testing and they spray it with water and like destroy them basically. Mm-hmm. And he interviewed like the head of hardware or whatever at Apple, and the guy was saying that there's sort of a, like, when it comes to durability, like durability and reliability are kind of like opposed to each other, he was saying. Or no, sorry, durability and repairability are at odds, is what he was saying. you're gonna have some editing to do. Nah, it's okay. But basically, like you're saying, the more repairable you make something, the less durable that can make it. Especially with like water resistance, right? If something's easy to open, like the water is gonna get in easier.
Yeah.
And he was saying that at least with iPhone, and that's the thing too. You know, phones are different than laptops. But he was saying that in their view, making phones more durable, even if that means less repairable, is better for the environment over time. Because I guess the idea is that when you break your phone, you're buying a new one more than repairing it.
Yeah.
Depending on what you do to it. But I think with like water getting in there, you're kind of buying a new one.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So
depending on what got fried.
And he mentioned like, with the big thing with phones is batteries, right? Because batteries just don't last forever.
Yeah.
And so supposedly, and this is a guy who works at Apple, supposedly they make it somewhat easy for them to get in there and like replace a battery, which is good, but they do sacrifice repairability for that durability, and overall the durability strides they've made have reduced e-waste a lot. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. But I mean, okay, like with like a gaming PC, like it's part of gaming PC culture to replace parts.
Right.
Right. That's like part of it, because there's you come home with your graphics card, there's a new one that's better than that tomorrow, So I think being able to transfer that to laptops is huge. And, I think a lot of people listening to this probably have like old laptops that are just laying around.
Yeah.
That maybe they could repair, but it's like, is this compatible with that? As long as Framework exists, I can go to Framework Shop and I can buy stuff, replace stuff, and that should be less e-waste.
Yeah. I don't know. That's an interesting argument about durability versus repairability. I don't know. I guess I'll take his word for it that increased durability reduces e-waste in the long run. Yeah.
I think it makes sense for phones. I think like when my phone's screwing up, I just, a phone is like $1,000 for like the best one. So, repairing it for a couple $100 is like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
I don't know. Especially, and now you can like trade in your old one. So it's like, you're not just throwing it away or whatever.
What happens to my old one when I do that though?
I have no idea. I know that they recycle some parts of it. I don't know how much of it is really recyclable or what they really do, but I guess they at least take the metal and can recycle that.
I've always been a little skeptical of like laptop recycle programs. I really don't know what happens, but I hope it gets recycled.
I mean, some stuff, like I'm pretty sure the batteries are just disposed.
Yeah.
And I think probably the glass and a lot of the components are probably just disposed of. I can't imagine the plastic, like you can't really, I don't know.
I have a really old laptop from like, it's running Windows 98 but it still boots up and it still runs. And I've been sitting on it for years now thinking, can I like donate this to a school or something? And I try to look around for places, and most of the stuff I find is like, we won't take anything that's older than 3 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just unfortunate. It seems like if it boots up and somebody could use it to browse the internet, like, I don't know.
Probably somebody out there. There should be like, I mean, I guess what most like developers do with that type of thing is they like host a server or whatever on it, maybe we should start that. Maybe there should be a program that's like, hey, I want to run a Minecraft server. I'll take fucking anything.
Yeah.
But then people are just gonna take it in mine crypto though.
That's true. So now our environmental impact.
Maybe we say we do that and we just take the laptops and we mine crypto.
Did you just develop a scam?
Allegedly. Do anything else you want to talk about? Any other tools, productivity tools you wouldn't recommend to people, but you would recommend to some people?
I think those are the ones I had in mind. I just think it's, I don't know, this conversation went a slightly different way than I was expecting. I was thinking about tools that are interesting to me that are not interesting to other people, but as we were talking about this, I do think it's kind of more of a spectrum. It's more of a continuum where it's about how you feel about learning new stuff, how you feel about taking risks on new things that are different from your old things, even if that might not pay off. Maybe you learn a new tool and it doesn't end up doing anything for you. I think that's interesting. I think that, I don't know, maybe I should get back into trying some new tools, see what else is out there. It's been a lot of years since I've really dug deep and kind of seen the landscape and seen what's out there in terms of productivity tools and stuff like that.
Yeah, same.
All right, we'll do it.
That's it, I guess.
All right, catch you guys next time.
Bye.
We'll do a fade out.
1X Developer Podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Collin. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for listening to this episode of the 1X Developer Podcast, and let you know that if you have any questions, comments, or if you just want to tell us about your day, you can reach us at X, formerly known as Twitter, at 1X Developer Podcast. We're also on YouTube at 1X Developer Podcast. You can email us if you're weird at 1xdeveloperpodcast at protonmail.com. And lastly, don't forget to follow, subscribe, all that stuff, so you don't miss any further episodes of the 1X Developer Podcast. Thanks so much. See you next time.